Wendy, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
It's really good to have you physically here. I know obviously you've been in Singapore and then you've been spending quite a bit of time in the US as well, which we can talk about a little bit later. But for the audience, why don't we just start? Why don't you just tell us who you are and what your company does?
Sure, my favorite topic.
Exactly.
So I'm Wendy. I'm the founder of Omnistream.
Yep.
My personal background, it's a combination of quant trading and engineering. So I started my career in a very atypical way. I actually have a bit of like a reverse career.
A reverse career?
Yeah, like from
From
a founder's perspective, it is very much a reverse career, right? It's not like, college dropout and then go into startup. I actually went to Wall Street, did quant trading for a while.
Yep.
And then after that, I did independent angel investing.
Yep.
And then I became a founder.
So that is a reverse career.
Exactly.
Yeah, I see what you mean now.
Yeah, usually it's like the other way around.
How did that, well, before we get into how that happened, tell us about Omnistream. Tell us what Omnistream does and what that business is.
Yeah. So Omnistream, our purpose is to make consumers' lives a little bit better every day.
Yep.
And the way that we do that is we bring consumer level planning to grocery and convenience chains.
Cool.
It's an industry that touches every single person in the world.
Yeah.
But it's still operating off of technologies, systems, and processes that are just antiquated, human-centric, and quite frankly, wasteful. So like our mission is to bring algorithms, processes, and systems that really leverage on personalization and store level planning to bring that experience to customers.
Okay.
So it's not just like it's not just like store level planning or something like very, very niche like that. The actual lever for growth is around waste. So as you can imagine, if you plan every single store to be the same using like human processes, you end up with a store that fits nobody. It's just like the average person.
So you're talking about being a jack of all trades, master of none kind of scenario,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. And that's like the state of grocery and convenience today. So as you can imagine, there's a ton of produce that's wasted.
Yep.
There's a ton of products on shelves that like just don't sell.
Yep.
So if you can just eliminate a little bit of that waste, you can actually pass on a lot of that savings, a lot of that happiness to the consumer, especially in a world like today where inflation is massive and a lot of families are struggling with food prices. So like that's our mission, right? How do we make life a little bit better for these consumers by just saving on the planning and making sure that everything's tailored to them?
And you're doing that through AI and tech, right?
Exactly. So I'm really leveraging my background on the algorithmic side.
Yeah.
So like, how do you actually create not just the algorithms, but also the processes? So like, how do humans and machines even interact, right? Like that in itself is a really interesting field.
Massive question.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Like the natural tendency is for people just to be afraid of change, afraid of automation. And we know that. Like I've seen that a lot in the finance industry back in the early days. So we try to bring a lot of that almost like philosophy into how we build out our product today.
Okay, interesting. So just to clear it up in terms of you are going into any kind of retail physical store. So this isn't more e-commerce store, this is physical stores, right?
do both.
You do both?
Yeah,
okay, well, let's start with the physical.
Okay.
So with the physical stores, you're looking at the demographic of the area that it's in and you're making sure that the products that are there suit that demographic and are priced accordingly. Is that what you mean from that point of view?
That's an interesting point. We don't think so much about demographics. We think more about, like, our philosophy is you are what you buy, you are what you want to buy.
Yeah.
So we don't say just because you're a male of a certain age, of a certain background, you must buy this.
Yep.
Because that's just not how people work. We look at things like, hey, yes, we do look at the composition of the neighborhood in terms of socioeconomics, but we also look at things like, what are the alternatives? So how many competitors are nearby? Also, what are people doing when they're in that neighborhood? Like where we are today here in CBD Sydney,
Yep.
people don't live here, but there's a lot of people who pass by here.
Yes.
So like, are they in a hurry? What is it that they're actually looking for? Are they about to head on to transit, right?
Right.
So it's just as much about the people who live nearby as it is the need states.
Okay. And then from an e-commerce point of view, how do you do that? Is it done from like an IP address? Is that how do you optimize an e-commerce store, which I guess is being accessed from anywhere?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. We have a business line that's dedicated to what we call dark stores. I think in Australia, you call them quick commerce.
Yes, yeah. They're like, I know what you mean. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So there, it's not necessarily an IP address. The catchment area is much wider
Yeah.
than a traditional store. But the driver of that business model is really around basket size.
Okay.
So like if you have a ton of consumers just buying one bottle of Coke, that's a loss-making business, right? Yeah. You have to send a rider
Yes.
out for every bottle of Coke. So how is it that you actually entice the consumer through assortment and also through just like the ability to pack everything in a short period of time, such that it entices like a giant basket?
Yeah. Okay. So you're optimizing it that way. So they're quite different, those two models, are they not?
They sound different, but the fundamental technology behind it actually converges.
There you go. All right. Well, let's go a little bit back to how you ended up doing your reverse career. So you went to uni. Well, of course you went to uni. You ended up at Wall Street, right? So when you went to Wall Street, what made you decide to do that? You know, it's a brutal environment. Obviously, the rewards are great, but it's not for everyone. What made you go, right, I'm going to go to Wall Street?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I started my career in 2007. Mm-hmm. This was a really interesting inflection point in like equities markets. So you had all of this digital infrastructure just kind of being settled.
Yep.
It was still a world where there were trading pits and, you know.
Gosh, that was a while ago.
Yeah, exactly. 2007 is a long time ago,
yeah,
right?
it is. It is. It doesn't sound it, but it is.
Yeah. So it's a ton of humans making like emotional decisions or gut-driven decisions.
Yep.
And suddenly you had this wave of change with the digital infrastructure coming in. So I didn't go to a traditional investment bank. I didn't go to a traditional like trading fund that depended on salespeople. I went into like algorithmically driven market maker. So like culturally, it's actually a lot more like a tech company.
I suppose so. Was that the beginning of that algorithmic trading?
Yeah, I mean, there were algorithmic traders before that time, but that was really the inflection point.
Yeah.
So it's like a combination of just timing and finding the firm with the right cultural fit. So like for me, that was the ideal place to really start my career. Just the personality wise, it's the type of industry that really values like intellectual curiosity, intellectual honesty, and just really pushing yourself to learn a little more every day.
Would have been super interesting place to go at that time.
Yeah, I mean, even now, I'm sure it's a super interesting industry.
Yeah.
But at that time, yeah, just watching it grow, watching the rules change, seeing what was possible, it was just incredible.
Okay, so when you're sitting there at Wall Street, you're doing this algorithmic trading, right? It's a pretty full-on environment. How do you suddenly end up doing angel investing? Is that because you saw the market shift in what you're investing in, or was it because of something else?
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually left the industry in 2012.
Yep.
And, you know, what do I do with myself, right? There was still so much about the world that I wanted to learn. I wanted to understand different industries. Yep. I wanted to understand, like, how do things operate in, like, quant finance is such an obscure thing.
It is.
Yeah, so, like, how do things operate in grocery? How do things operate in technology? And I thought one of the best ways to do this was just to invest in the disruptors.
Fair enough. So did you do that as a full-time job, or how did that eventuate into you eventually going, you know what, I think I need to start one of these?
Yeah. I never thought about taking a job with someone else because I didn't think doing a lot of analysis or a lot of financial modeling would have been the way to learn at the optimal pace.
Yep.
So I thought, okay, what edge, and of course it would be nice to make some money while doing it.
Of course.
So I was just thinking, what edge do I have, or what edge could I possibly bring? At that time, I wasn't that far out of school. So I was still in touch with a lot of people that I knew in uni. I knew which ones were very aggressive, which ones had the type of demeanor that would probably make them undervalued in traditional VC.
Yep.
So I started there. So I would just spend a lot of time between Canada and Silicon Valley and just seeing who was working on some interesting things. There was a lot going on in both consumer and B2B at that time.
Yeah, particularly 2012.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there was a big shift.
Exactly. So yeah, it was a good year to get in on like angel deals.
Yeah, and how, out of interest, how did it go? Have any of those angel deals particularly paid off, or look like they're skyrocketing, or have you had a pretty decent spread?
Yeah, so the one that really got me thinking about grocery and I guess like planning within the physical store was Instacart. So they're a grocery delivery startup that started around 2011.
Yeah.
I mean, they're a multi unicorn by now. But in the early days, it was just so fascinating reading their updates and just understanding, like getting a deeper understanding on how grocery chains work.
It's an interesting space, grocery. You know, I think one of the things my parents told me when I was young was they said, make sure you get into an industry where, like soap. This is what they said to me, soap. I said, soap. Yeah, people will always need soap. I'm not going to go and work in soap. But I think, you know, and I didn't. But I think that I think the grocery, it's one of those things. It's never going to go away. It's been through this enormous transformation and is still going through it today, which you are part of now.
Yeah.
But it's probably not what you would imagine when you're sitting there on Wall Street. I'm going to end up working in grocery. It's just not. So it's quite an interesting avenue that you ended up and that you found fascinating. Yeah.
Well, a lot of that is just, wow, think about what changes when the price of food changes by 2%.
Everything.
Like everything, right? It's political stability.
Yep. It's crazy, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you're launching this out of Singapore, aren't you?
Yeah.
So how's that come about?
Yeah, that's kind of a funny question. I think a lot of founders don't, especially in the B2B space, they don't think enough about where are we going to find our visionary early adopters.
Right. No, they don't.
Yeah, like they just start in whatever country they happen to be based in.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, like you can tell I'm not Singaporean, I'm Canadian. But when we first started this, I needed someone like a really visionary CEO who understood that if you are going to do automated planning in like a hybrid human versus machine or first human and machine combo system,
yep,
it's not just the systems change, right? There's going to be process change and philosophy change. Like, it's not just one person who buys in. No. There's a lot of change that has to happen.
It's everybody.
Exactly. So I needed a CEO who had enough scale, who really understood that.
To change the world to some degree, right?
To some degree, right? Especially their world.
Yeah. And so that person was based in Singapore.
That person is based out of the Philippines.
Oh, okay.
Yes, but for hiring, there are a lot of reasons.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah. I get it. I understand. Yeah. Cool. So right now, how old's the business?
4 years.
4 years. And where are you at? And I guess, I kind of know where you're at, but we want to tell the audience where you're at. Yeah. But I'm also intrigued to sort of say, in those first 4 years pretty tough in any business.
Yes.
What's been the most difficult thing for you in that first 4 years? We like to talk about things that are a little bit, a lot of these podcasts always talk about how wonderful everything is and how successful everything is, right? And we all know that's just simply not true. It's bloody hard. It's always hard. So what's been the hardest thing to get you where you are today, and where are you today, and where's that sort of leading now? Because you're at an inflection point yourself, I think.
Yes, I agree.
So yeah, tell me a little bit about what was the hardest thing to get from, okay, we found the CEO, he's based in the Philippines, we're launching out of Singapore, to today.
Yeah, by far the hardest part was, and I think this is a mistake that a lot of founders make early on in the journey. By far the hardest part was making sure that we stuck to our guns in terms of keeping that core culture of the company.
Okay.
So in the early days, it was just very organic. We're a bunch of relatively nerdy people who wanted to think quantitatively about the world, right?
That's not nerdy at all.
Hey, nerdy is sexy and nerdy is cool.
This is true.
It's fine.
This is true.
Yeah. And there was this natural form of humility, intellectual curiosity, because we're going into industry that's worked for 100 years before we showed up, right? Yep. We can't come in and be like, we know better than you how to run logistics. We know better than you how to do planning. You just don't.
Yep.
Logistics always worked before tech, right? So you have to have that humility. So it's how do we maintain innovation combined with humility, combined with intellectual honesty? In the early days, that was so easy because we were a very small team. We were kind of go-getters, do it yourself, and we tried to understand things and think from first principles. But as we expanded, as we brought on more senior leadership, people with more industry experience or different industry experience, we actually found that our core culture started slipping a little bit. Mm-hmm. And that's not what our customers expect of us. So actually last year, over the 12 months, as we raised our Series A and went into expansion mode, I actually had to do the very painful thing of basically churning out some key team members.
Yeah.
We just need to maintain that culture and that level that we set for ourselves.
And it happens with every company, right? As they grow, it gets harder and harder to maintain that culture.
Yeah.
Those team members you had to churn out, well, one, congratulations for doing that, because a lot of people don't, very much to their detriment. Were they very early people, or were they people that had just come in because you were hiring so quickly or you were growing so quickly, you just let it slip? Yeah, that tends to be the way.
Exactly.
Well done, because it's a very difficult thing to do. Now, you've said a couple of times, you've used the term intellectual honesty. honesty. I want you to explain that to me. What does that mean to you? Because it's a really, I've heard it, but I've never really, I think I know, but I want to know what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, to us, it's a very important cultural value within the company. So I think it's good to explain. So there's a couple of mental models, right? So you can either solve problems from first principles, where you just break down what are the assumptions, what are my assumptions, what are the industry assumptions, and what does that logically lead to? And how many other layers of assumptions am I making in the middle? Where are the risks? That's like first principles thinking, right? The second model, which I think is extremely common, especially in MNCs, is just, oh, how did we do things yesterday? And okay, let's just improve incrementally on that without thinking about the baseline assumptions. Like industries change, right? So when your first principles assumptions changes, I need people who are able to think through what that propagation means. So there's first principles thinking, and then there's analogy-based thinking.
So it's true innovation as opposed to just improving through the use of technology is really what you're talking about. It's a completely different way of thinking in terms of using technology to change something rather than just improve something.
Yes, I think that's the end result, but it goes a lot deeper than that, right? So there's a lot of, without going too much into detail, because we could talk about this for like 10 hours. Like in retail planning, there's a lot of things that people have done a certain way for like 100 years, or for 10 years, or for 10 months. So what were the underlying assumptions? Like, why did they decide to do things like that? And has that changed? Because like, there's some tech people who just come in and just say, this makes no sense to me, therefore I'm just going to totally change it. And that's bad when you're going into industry that impacts billions of people, right? Like you could have some very strange unintended consequences.
There's losing the humility there. That's what you're talking about. Yeah, absolutely.
So are you willing to accept that there's probably like a 50% chance that some of your assumptions are wrong? Are you willing to think through the consequences of that?
Okay. That's intellectual honesty. That's interesting. That's it's amazing that you've recognized that and you're conscious of that. I think that's incredible.
Yeah, I think it's important to ask people whenever they make bold, like confident statements, what's your confidence interval on that statement? Is that like 50% to be true? Or are you like 95% to be true? It's really funny because with middle seniority people, they tend to tell me I am 95% confident of this. I was like, okay, then
why?
Not just why. I ask them, okay, if you are actually wrong about this, will you pay me like $10,000? I will actually
you
make
really
you
put
pay
it on the line.
Yeah, and then they're like, oh no, because of XYZ, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we mean. There's always some edge cases that you haven't thought through. So what are those?
I like that. I like that intellectual honesty. We're going to have to start using that. Okay, so tell us where you're at right now. Where's the business at right now?
Yeah, well, we started in Asia with Asian retailers, and we've had the best customers like early on that really helped us co-innovate. But we're at a stage now where our platform, our systems, our support capabilities, we're ready for global expansion. So we raised our Series A primarily for expansion into Australia. We're also doing a few key customers over in the US. So that's where we're at.
That's where you're at. That's why we're talking.
Exactly.
Global expansion. That's what we do.
Yeah, exactly.
Cool. And so if someone is out there watching the show and they're thinking, gosh, this sounds really fascinating, that they really are sort of wanting to know more, tell me, why would someone want to come and work for Omnistream?
Yeah, well, let me give you three.
All right, let's go three. Reasons. I like three, even better.
Yeah. So the first one, we're actually very much a mission-driven company. Like we want to make lives a little bit better for consumers. So we're targeting an industry that has such massive scale, right?
It does.
So it's not just, okay, yes, like there's a lot of technologies that touch a lot of people, but are they making a positive influence? Are they actually doing something that you're proud of at the end of the day? So we actually think, like, if you care about decreasing waste, making people eat a little bit healthier, and just generally slightly improving the health of billions of people, I think we actually have a shot at doing that.
That's a hell of a mission.
Exactly. And like, we really believe that. So you'll see that the way we do things, it's not always just short-term profit maximizing. And like, I'm saying this because it's important to me to bring in the right type of people. So I think that's like the first huge type of reason.
That's a huge reason.
And the second, exactly. Mission-driven, like live life with purpose, right? And the second thing, we really are quite a geeky, like intellectually motivated company. So if you're that type of personality, you'll do well with us. And that's not an MNC kind of personality.
No.
So it kind of comes back to that cultural fit as well. And I guess there's always got to be three reasons. You can't just say two,
No, come on,
right?
what's the third one?
We're just going through this period of massive growth. So if you want to have a lot of flexibility in your career and just see a lot of different things globally, then now's a great time to be with us.
Oh, look, I agree. I mean, I think any company, when they go global, when they're at your Series A stage, it's such an exciting time because you've kind of you've gone from being a startup of a whole bunch of people trying to make something work to a proper company.
Yeah.
And now it's about taking that proper company and taking it to the world, right? There's no more exciting time than to join any company. I think most people would enjoy that.
Exactly.
Awesome. All right. Well, I've got one more question for you, and I do ask this because if I don't, people put in the comments and ask me why I didn't ask it. And that is, do you have and I think people just love recommendations, right? Particularly from other founders, because we have a lot of founders watch the show. Do you have a favorite book or a favorite podcast that you would recommend?
Yeah.
Other than this one.
Of course.
I expect you to answer this one, by the way, when you go on all other podcasts from now.
Yeah,
you're saying,
sure.
Give it a nudge.
Yeah, okay. So let's talk about a non-business one, right? Because I'm sure people hear a lot about the business ones. I actually really like Marginal Revolution. So it's this rational economics blog out of the US.
Okay.
But it's just fascinating. It takes, it's a little bit of a libertarian lean.
Yeah.
So it takes economic theory or rationalist theory and it tries to apply it to like everyday life. So even like what are you eating, right? How do you think about picking the right food using economics theory? Or how do you use that to think of, how do you use birth rates to try to predict the outcomes in wars and how people will fight? So it's just like, okay, how do you reason that through? And it's just so fascinating.
I think ever since that book Freakonomics came out, there's been a lot of people interested more in what you can do with economics and that kind of stuff. So that might, I might even have a look at that myself. Wendy, thank you so much for coming on the show. It has been a pleasure to have you on. How much longer are you here for another week, I think, in Australia?
Yep.
Before you head back to Singapore?
Yeah.
Yeah. So enjoy the time. Hopefully it'll stop raining. But thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve.